The doors of La Stella Nera exploded open with a force that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. Every conversation died. Every fork froze mid-air. Every head turned toward the entrance, where a child stood trembling in the doorway like a ghost that had wandered in from another world entirely. He couldn't have been more than 11 years old. His clothes were torn and dirty, hanging off his small frame like rags. Fresh blood streaked down his left arm from a nasty gash near his elbow. His face was covered in scratches, some still bleeding, creating crimson trails through the dirt that caked his cheeks. His knuckles were scraped raw and swollen, as if he'd been punching brick walls. But it was his eyes that made even the hardest men in that restaurant feel something twist in their chests. Those eyes were wild with terror, red-rimmed from crying, dilated with pure panic. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen hell and barely escaped. The maitre d' rushed forward, his face a mixture of horror and professional concern. This was La Stella Nera, the Black Star, the most exclusive, most dangerous restaurant in Boston. You didn't just wander in here, especially not looking like you'd crawled through a war zone. Young man, you can't, the maitre d' began, reaching for the boy's shoulder. The child jerked away from his touch, as if he'd been burned, stumbling backward into a decorative column. His chest heaved with desperate breaths. His whole body shook so violently he could barely stand. "Please," the word came out as a broken sob. "Please, someone help me. They took her. They're gonna kill her. Please." The restaurant remained frozen in that surreal moment. Wealthy businessmen in $1,000 suits exchanged uncomfortable glances. Women in designer dresses looked away, not wanting to acknowledge the inconvenient suffering that had crashed into their elegant evening. The waiters stood paralyzed, unsure whether to help the child or remove him before he disturbed the ambiance further. But the boy wasn't looking at any of them. His desperate gaze swept across the dining room, searching, hunting for something with the instinct of prey that knows its only chance of survival lies in finding the right predator. His eyes passed over the politicians dining in corner booths, over the celebrities trying to eat in privacy, over the businessmen discussing their latest acquisitions. And then his eyes found exactly what they were looking for. In the far corner of the restaurant, in the seat that commanded a view of both the entrance and the kitchen, sat a man who radiated power like other people radiated heat. He was bald, with a neck tattoo that disappeared beneath the collar of an immaculately tailored burgundy suit. His face was weathered but strong, marked by a thin scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, a souvenir from a knife fight decades ago. Everything about him screamed danger, from the cold calculation in his dark eyes to the way his bodyguards flanked him like wolves protecting their alpha. This was Alessandro Rizzo, the most dangerous man in Boston, the king of an empire built on fear, respect, and blood. At 48 years old, he'd survived 3 decades in a world where most men didn't last 3 years. He controlled half the city's underground operations. Legitimate businessmen paid him protection money. Corrupt politicians took his calls at 3 in the morning. Even other crime families gave him a wide berth, because Alessandro Rizzo was known for 2 things: keeping his word and eliminating his enemies with ruthless efficiency. He was not a man you approached uninvited. He was not a man who showed mercy. He was not a man who involved himself in the problems of ordinary people. But the child, in his desperation and terror, somehow recognized that this was the only person in that room with the actual power to help him. The boy's small fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned whiter than they already were, from the raw scrapes that covered them. His jaw set with a determination that seemed impossible for someone so young and so clearly terrified. And then he ran. He sprinted across that expensive marble floor, his worn sneakers squeaking with each frantic step, leaving small spots of blood in his wake from cuts that continued to seep. The maitre d' lunged after him. A waiter tried to intercept. 2 security guards moved to block his path. But the boy was fast, driven by the kind of desperate speed that comes only from knowing someone you love is dying while you waste precious seconds. He dodged between tables like a running back avoiding tackles, knocking over a wine glass that shattered on the floor, sending diners scrambling back from their tables. Alessandro's bodyguards rose from their seats, hands moving instinctively toward their concealed weapons. Dante Bonfiglio, Alessandro's right-hand man, actually drew his gun halfway from its shoulder holster. Rocco Ventimiglia, the enforcer sitting across from Alessandro, tensed like a coiled spring ready to intercept the charging child. Alessandro held up one hand, a simple gesture that froze both men in place. His eyes never left the boy as he watched this small, broken child sprint toward him with the determination of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The boy reached Alessandro's table and, without hesitation, without the self-preservation instinct that should have stopped him, grabbed Alessandro's arm with both of his small, bloodied hands. His fingers clutched the expensive burgundy fabric with the desperation of a drowning man grasping a lifeline. The entire restaurant held its breath. Every person in that room knew who Alessandro Rizzo was. They knew his reputation. They knew that men who touched him without permission often didn't leave with all their fingers intact. The boy's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, his words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. "They're gonna kill her. Please, you have to help. They took my sister. They just grabbed her off the street and threw her in a van, and I tried to stop them but they were too strong, and one of them hit me and I fell, and I tried to follow but the van was too fast, and I heard them talking about the docks and a shipment, and please," he choked on a sob, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "Please, sir. Everyone says you're the most powerful man in the city. Everyone says you can do anything. Please help me find her. They're gonna kill her. I know they're gonna kill her." The silence that followed was absolute and terrible. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant. Every eye was on Alessandro Rizzo, waiting to see how the notorious crime boss would handle this shocking violation of protocol, this desperate child who dared to touch him, to beg him, to bring the messy reality of human suffering into his carefully controlled world. Alessandro looked down at the small hands gripping his arm, hands that were scraped raw from what must have been a fight, hands that trembled with exhaustion and terror, hands that belonged to a child who should have been at home doing homework, not begging a crime lord for help. And then Alessandro looked into the boy's eyes. In that moment, something happened that hadn't happened to Alessandro Rizzo in 25 years. Something cracked in the fortress he'd built around his heart. A fortress constructed from years of violence, loss, and the deliberate choice to never, ever care about anything that could be taken from him. Because looking into this terrified boy's eyes, Alessandro saw himself, not as he was now powerful, feared, untouchable, but as he'd been at 23 years old, running through the streets of Boston searching desperately for his little sister Isabella. Knowing in his heart that he was already too late, the boy was still gripping his arm, still looking up at him with those desperate eyes, waiting for judgment, waiting to see if the monster he'd begged for help had any humanity left in him at all. Alessandro's hand moved slowly, deliberately. His bodyguards tensed, unsure what their boss was about to do. The restaurant patrons leaned forward almost imperceptibly, morbidly curious about what would happen next. And then Alessandro Rizzo did something that shocked every single person in that room. He placed his hand gently on the child's shoulder, his voice low but carrying through the absolute silence. "What's your name, son?" The boy's breath hitched at the question, as if kindness was so unexpected it hurt worse than cruelty would have. His bloodied fingers slowly loosened their death grip on Alessandro's sleeve, though he didn't let go entirely, as if afraid that releasing his hold might make this powerful man disappear like smoke. "Marcus," he managed, his voice cracking. "Marcus Chen. And my sister, her name is Lily. She's only 9 years old." Alessandro's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 9 years old. The same age Isabella had been. He pushed that thought down into the locked vault where he kept all his ghosts, but it was too late. The door had already cracked open. "Sit down, Marcus," Alessandro said, pulling out the chair beside him. It was an order given gently, but still an order. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen in shocked silence, witnesses to something they would talk about in whispers for years to come. Marcus collapsed into the chair, as if his legs had finally given up trying to hold him. Up close, Alessandro could see he was even worse off than he'd initially appeared. The gash on his arm was deep, still bleeding sluggishly. His shirt was torn, revealing bruises blooming purple and yellow across his ribs. One eye was beginning to swell shut. "Dante," Alessandro said without looking away from the boy. "First aid kit. And water." His right-hand man moved immediately, snapping his fingers at a nearby waiter who practically tripped over himself hurrying to comply. Within seconds, a glass of water appeared in front of Marcus, followed shortly by a comprehensive medical kit that Alessandro suspected came from behind the bar. La Stella Nera was the kind of place that needed to be prepared for emergencies of all kinds. "Drink," Alessandro commanded, pushing the water closer. Marcus grabbed it with shaking hands, gulping it down so fast he choked. Alessandro waited patiently until the boy had drained the glass and was breathing slightly easier. "Now," Alessandro said, his voice low and controlled, the voice of a man used to extracting information efficiently. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Where were you when they took her?" Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, smearing blood and tears across his cheek. Walking home from school. We always walk home together. Mom works 2 jobs, so it's just us most of the time. His voice broke again, but he forced himself to continue. We were on Harrison Avenue, near the old textile factory. There's this shortcut through the parking lot we always take. Alessandro knew the area. It was borderline territory, not quite in his control, not quite outside it. A gray zone where predators liked to hunt because no one was watching too closely. A van pulled up, Marcus continued, his words coming faster now, as if he needed to get them out before they choked him. Black van, no windows in the back. 3 men got out. They grabbed Lily before I even understood what was happening. I tried. His voice cracked into something raw and anguished. I tried to fight them. I swear I did. I hit one of them, and he laughed. He just laughed and backhanded me so hard I flew into a dumpster. He touched his swollen eye reflexively, wincing. By the time I got up, they had her in the van. She was screaming my name. She was so scared. And I couldn't do anything. The guilt and shame in the boy's voice was so thick Alessandro could taste it. He recognized it intimately. It was the same guilt that had eaten at him for 25 years. The certainty that he should have been faster, stronger, better. You did what you could, Alessandro said, and was surprised to find he meant it. You're here now. That takes courage. Marcus shook his head violently. I ran after the van. I ran until I thought my lungs would explode, but it was too fast. I lost them near the waterfront. He looked up at Alessandro with desperate hope, but I heard them. Before they drove off, I heard one of them say something about the docks, and the shipment leaves at midnight, and the girl will bring a good price. Alessandro's expression didn't change, but inside, something cold and lethal shifted into place. Human trafficking. It was one of the few lines even men in his profession usually didn't cross. Those who did were considered the lowest form of criminal and the most dangerous, because they had nothing to lose. Did you see their faces? Alessandro asked. Any identifying marks? Tattoos? Scars? Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, clearly forcing himself to remember through the trauma. The one who hit me. He had a tattoo on his neck. A snake. And he had an accent. Russian, maybe? I'm not sure. And the van. The license plate started with 7H something. I couldn't see the rest. Alessandro glanced at Dante, who was already pulling out his phone. The Russian mob had been trying to establish trafficking operations in Boston for months. Alessandro had made it very clear they weren't welcome in his territory. But gray zones like Harrison Avenue were harder to control. How long ago? Alessandro asked Marcus. An hour. Maybe less. I ran here as fast as I could. Everyone at school talks about this restaurant. About you. They say you run this city. They say if anyone could find someone, it would be you. Marcus's eyes filled with fresh tears. Please, she's all I have. Mom's barely home. Lily's my responsibility. I promised I'd keep her safe, and I failed, and now they're going to... Stop. Alessandro cut him off. Not harshly, but firmly. You haven't failed yet, and you're not going to. He stood up, and the entire restaurant seemed to exhale as one. Rocco and Dante immediately rose as well, flanking him automatically. Alessandro pulled out his phone and made a call. It was answered on the first ring. Piero, I need every man we have on the docks. Now. Russian operation. Trafficking. Black van. Partial plate. 7H. They have a 9-year-old girl. Find them. He paused, listening. I don't care if you have to tear apart every container. Find them. The shipment supposedly leaves at midnight. We have... He glanced at his watch, 4 hours. He ended the call and made 3 more in rapid succession, each one mobilizing different parts of his organization. Informants on the street. Men in the harbor master's office. Police contacts who owed him favors. Within 5 minutes, he'd set in motion a search operation that would have made the FBI jealous. Marcus watched him with something approaching awe, barely daring to hope. Alessandro looked down at the boy and saw himself again, that desperate 23-year-old who would have done anything, paid any price, made any deal with any devil, if it meant getting his sister back. But Alessandro had been too late. He'd found Isabella 3 days after she disappeared, in a warehouse by the docks. The image of what they'd done to her was burned into his brain. A nightmare that never faded no matter how much blood he'd spilled in revenge. He wouldn't be too late this time. Come on, Alessandro said, heading toward the door. Marcus jumped up, stumbling slightly, and Alessandro's hand shot out to steady him. Dante, get him cleaned up in the car. Rocco, you're driving. As they walked through the restaurant, every eye followed them. The maître d' stood frozen with his mouth open. A waiter dropped a tray. An elderly woman clutched her pearls as if she'd witnessed something religious, because they had just seen something that would become legend. Alessandro Rizzo, the most feared man in Boston, walking out of his own restaurant to save a stranger's little sister. As they reached the door, Marcus grabbed Alessandro's sleeve again. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice small and confused. "You don't even know us." Alessandro paused, looking down at this brave, broken child. For a moment, he considered telling the truth that he was doing this because he'd failed his own sister, because the guilt had poisoned every day of his life since, because maybe saving Lily could somehow balance the cosmic scales just a fraction. But instead, he simply said, "Because some things are more important than business." And then they were out in the cold Boston night, racing against time to save a 9-year-old girl from monsters. The black Mercedes SUV cut through Boston's streets like a shark through dark water. In the back seat, Dante worked efficiently on Marcus's wounds with the first aid kit, cleaning the gash on his arm with practiced precision, while the boy bit his lip to keep from crying out. Alessandro sat in the front passenger seat, his phone pressed to his ear, orchestrating the search with the cool efficiency of a general deploying troops. Through the rearview mirror, Rocco watched the road ahead with the intense focus of a wheelman who'd navigated more than his share of dangerous situations. "Maxime," Alessandro said into the phone, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "I know you're there. Pick up." There was a click, then a heavily accented voice. "Rizzo is late. What you want?" "Someone's running a trafficking operation out of the docks. Black van, Russian crew, took a 9-year-old girl about an hour ago. You know anything about this?" Silence on the other end. Maxim Sokolov was the liaison between Alessandro's organization and the various Eastern European groups operating in Boston. He was useful because he always knew who was doing what in the Russian community. "This is not approved operation," Maxim finally said, and Alessandro could hear genuine anger in his voice. "We do not do children. Never children. This is how you say unsanctioned. Rogue. Then you won't mind if I shut it down, permanently." "I help you," Maxim said immediately. "I make calls. Find out which rats disgrace our people with this filth. Snake tattoo on neck, you said?" In the back seat, Marcus's head shot up at the mention of the tattoo. "Yes," Alessandro confirmed. "Konstantin Volkov." Maxim spat the name like a curse. "Small-time enforcer. Stupid man. Greedy. He was warned to stay away from trafficking, but he does not listen. He works from Pier 17, an old fish processing plant. I send you location." "How many men does he have?" "Maybe 6, 7, but Rizzo." Maxim paused. "He is desperate man. Owes money to very bad people in Moscow. This shipment, it is his last chance. He will kill girl, rather than let her go. Understand?" "No witnesses." Alessandro's jaw clenched. "Then we'll have to make sure it doesn't come to that. Send me everything you have on Volkov and his crew." "And Maxim?" This conversation never happened. "What conversation?" Maxim replied, and the line went dead. Alessandro turned in his seat to look at Marcus. The boy's arm was now properly bandaged, his face cleaned of most of the blood, but his eyes were still haunted. "We have a location," Alessandro said. "Pier 17. Do you know if your sister has a phone?" Marcus shook his head miserably. "Mom couldn't afford one for her yet. I have one, but Lily doesn't." "Does she have anything on her they might not have found? Any jewelry? A watch?" Marcus's eyes suddenly widened. "Her backpack. She always carries this little purple backpack. And inside there's a digital watch, a cheap one from the dollar store, but she loves it. She keeps it in the front pocket because the clasp on the watch is broken." Alessandro was already dialing again. "Park, I need you to trace a signal. Cheap digital watch, probably with some kind of electronic component. The girl's name is Lily Chen. Might still have her backpack. Start with Pier 17 and expand outward." Park, Alessandro's tech specialist, didn't ask questions. "Give me 10 minutes. If there's any kind of signal, I'll find it." Rocco turned the SUV onto the expressway, heading toward the waterfront. The city lights blurred past, and Marcus pressed his face to the window, as if he could somehow see through the darkness to where his sister was being held. Alessandro's phone buzzed. A text from Piero. "Teams in position at all major piers. Harbor patrol on standby. No sign of girl yet, but we're sweeping every building." Another text, this time from Maxim. a file with photos of Konstantin Volkov and his known associates. Alessandro studied the faces, committing them to memory. Volkov was exactly what Maxim had described, a small-time thug with mean eyes and the desperate look of someone with nothing to lose. "How many men can you get to Pier 17? Marcus asked suddenly, his voice stronger than before. He was trying to be brave, trying to be useful. 20 are already on their way, Alessandro replied. But we're not going in with an army. Not yet. If Volkov thinks he's trapped, he'll kill her immediately. We need to be smart about this." "Then what's the plan?" Dante asked from the back seat. Alessandro stared out at the dark water of Boston Harbor, visible in glimpses between buildings. He'd learned a long time ago that the best plans were simple plans. Complicated schemes had too many points of failure. "We go in quiet. Small team. Me, you, Rocco, and 2 others. We locate the girl first, confirm she's there, then we extract her. The rest of our men create a perimeter, make sure nobody gets away." "And if they won't let her go?" Rocco asked quietly. Alessandro's voice was colder than the winter air outside. "Then we take her. And anyone who tries to stop us learns why people are afraid of my name." Marcus looked at Alessandro with a mixture of awe and fear. This was not the world he knew, not the kind of help he'd imagined. This was something darker, more dangerous, but it was also exactly what his sister needed. "What about me?" Marcus asked. "I'm coming with you." "No," Alessandro said immediately. "Absolutely not. She's my sister." Marcus's voice cracked with emotion. "I can't just sit in a car while you'll stay in the car because if something goes wrong, if I can't get to your sister, you need to be alive to keep searching. You need to be alive to identify her." If Alessandro stopped himself, but it was too late. The terrible possibility hung in the air between them. Marcus's face crumpled, but he nodded, understanding the brutal logic even as he hated it. Alessandro's phone rang. "Park. Got something," the tech specialist said without preamble. Faint electronic signal, consistent with a cheap digital watch. "It's stationary. Inside the old fish processing plant on Pier 17, northwest corner of the building, probably 2nd floor. Signal's weak. Could be because it's inside a bag, or because the battery's dying. Can you tell if it's moving?" "Negative. It's been in the same spot for the last 40 minutes. Could be good means they haven't moved her. Could be bad means they might have already." "Don't." Alessandro cut him off, glancing at Marcus. He ended the call and looked at Rocco. "How far?" 5 minutes. Alessandro pulled out his gun, checked the magazine, chambered around. Beside him, Dante did the same. Rocco kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near his own weapon. Marcus watched these preparations with wide eyes, the reality of what was about to happen sinking in. These men were preparing for war. For him. For Lily. "Mr. Rizzo?" Marcus said quietly. "Alessandro," the crime boss corrected, still checking his weapon. "Alessandro," Marcus repeated. "Why do you really do this? I know what you said at the restaurant, but that's not the whole truth, is it?" Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on his gun. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Marcus had heard it all night. "I had a sister once, Isabella. She was 9 years old when men like Volkov took her. I searched for 3 days. When I found her, I was too late." He looked at Marcus, and for just a moment, the feared crime boss's armor cracked, revealing the pain beneath. "I can't save Isabella, but maybe I can save Lily." Tears streamed down Marcus's face, but he nodded, understanding finally why this stranger had dropped everything to help. The SUV pulled into a darkened alley 3 blocks from Pier 17. Through the windshield, they could see the old fish processing plant looming against the night sky, a hulking shadow against the stars. Alessandro's phone buzzed one more time. A text from Piero. "Team in position. Waiting for your signal." Alessandro looked back at Marcus one last time. "Stay in the car. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Rocco stays with you. If we're not back in 30 minutes, you call this number." He handed Marcus a card. "And you tell them everything. You'll come back," Marcus said, trying to sound confident. "You'll come back with Lily." Alessandro wanted to promise that, wanted to tell this brave kid that everything would be okay. But he'd learned long ago that some promises couldn't be kept, and making them only made the breaking worse. So instead, he just nodded, opened the car door, and stepped out into the night. It was time to go to war. The fish processing plant loomed before them like a corpse of Boston's industrial past. 3 stories of crumbling brick and shattered windows. It had been abandoned for 15 years, left to rot while the city grew around it. Now it served a darker purpose, a perfect hiding place for men who dealt in human misery. Alessandro moved through the shadows with the fluid grace of a predator, Dante half a step behind him. Behind them came Giulio and Fabrizio, two of Alessandro's most trusted men. All four wore dark clothes and moved in complete silence, years of experience making them virtually invisible in the darkness. The perimeter was already secured. Alessandro could feel the presence of his men surrounding the building, 20 soldiers creating an invisible net that nothing could escape through. Piero had positioned them perfectly, each one with a clear line of sight, each one ready to move on Alessandro's signal. Alessandro pressed his finger to his earpiece. "Status," he whispered. Piero's voice crackled back. "North side clear. 2 guards at the east entrance, smoking. 1 guard visible on the 2nd floor, south window. Haven't seen anyone else yet, but there's definitely activity inside. Lights on the 2nd floor, northwest corner. That's where Park's signal is strongest. Exits? Main entrance east side, service entrance west side, loading dock south side, all covered. If they try to run, we'll see them." Alessandro studied the building. The smart move would be to go in through the west service entrance, less visible, easier to approach unseen, but smart moves took time, and Lily Chen didn't have time. He glanced at Dante, who nodded in understanding. They'd worked together long enough that words were often unnecessary. Dante signaled to Giulio and Fabrizio, and the 4 men began moving toward the east entrance where the 2 guards stood. The guards were careless, their attention on their cigarettes, and their conversation rather than their surroundings. Alessandro could hear them laughing about something, confident in the illusion of safety that darkness and isolation provided. That illusion was about to shatter. Alessandro and his team moved with practiced precision. One moment the guards were alone, the next Alessandro and Dante were behind them, guns pressed to their spines before they could even drop their cigarettes. "Not a sound," Alessandro whispered in Russian, his accent perfect. He'd learned the language years ago, knowing that in his line of work, understanding your enemies was as important as having guns. "How many inside?" The guard on Alessandro's side swallowed hard, his cigarette tumbling from nerveless fingers. 5. Volkov and 4 others. "The girl. Where is she?" "2nd floor. Northwest room. But you can't." The guard never finished his sentence. Alessandro's fist connected with his temple, dropping him instantly. Beside him, Dante's guard went down just as quickly. Giulio and Fabrizio caught them both, dragging them into the shadows and zip-tying their hands and feet. 5 inside, Alessandro whispered into his earpiece. "Target is northwest room, 2nd floor. Girl is there, moving in now." They slipped through the east entrance into a cavernous space that still smelled of fish and salt water despite years of abandonment. Rusted processing equipment cast strange shadows in the dim light filtering through broken windows. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a rhythmic sound that matched Alessandro's heartbeat. A staircase led to the 2nd floor, metal steps that would announce their approach with every footfall. Alessandro gestured to Dante, who moved to the base of the stairs, gun raised, covering their advance. Giulio and Fabrizio fanned out, checking the ground floor for any surprises. Alessandro started up the stairs, placing each foot carefully on the edges where the metal was strongest, where it would make the least noise. Years of practice made him almost silent, a ghost ascending toward the lights above. Voices drifted down from the 2nd floor, men speaking Russian, their words laced with casual cruelty that made Alessandro's jaw clench. They were talking about the girl, about how much she'd bring on the market, about the ship that would take her across the Atlantic, where she'd disappear forever into the nightmare industry of human trafficking. Over their voices, barely audible, Alessandro heard something that made his heart clench. Soft crying. A child's crying, muffled and scared. Lily was still alive. Alessandro reached the 2nd floor landing and pressed himself against the wall. The corridor stretched ahead, lit by bare bulbs that cast harsh shadows. 3 doors on the left, 2 on the right. The voices and the crying came from the first door on the left, the northwest corner, just as Park had predicted. He signaled Dante, who ghosted up the stairs to join him. Together they moved down the corridor, clearing each room with silent efficiency. Empty, empty, empty. The place was exactly as the guard had said, just 5 men total, and all of them apparently in the room with Lily. Alessandro positioned himself beside the target door. Through the gap at the bottom, he could see shadows moving inside. He could hear the men more clearly now. "Stop crying, girl. Save your tears. You'll need them where you're going." Cruel laughter. The sound of someone slapping something, a table maybe, or worse. Volkov, ship comes in 1 hour. We load her and 3 others. Money transfers tonight. By morning we are rich men. 3 others? Alessandro mouthed to Dante, who looked equally shocked. This was bigger than they'd thought. Lily wasn't the only victim tonight. Alessandro pressed his earpiece. Piero. Second sweep of the entire building. They have more girls. Find them. Copy that. Alessandro looked at Dante and held up 3 fingers. 3 seconds. Dante nodded, checking his weapon one last time. Giulio and Fabrizio reached the top of the stairs, taking positions to cover the corridor. Alessandro's mind was clear, focused. This was what he'd trained for his entire adult life, the moment when violence became necessary, when there was no negotiation, no compromise, only action. He thought of Isabella, his baby sister, who'd never gotten the chance to grow up. He thought of Marcus, waiting in the car, his whole world hanging in the balance. He thought of Lily, 9 years old and terrified, probably wondering if anyone was coming to save her. Someone was. 3, 2, 1. Alessandro kicked the door open with explosive force, the wood splintering around the lock. He moved through the doorway in a smooth motion, gun raised, his eyes taking in the scene in an instant. 5 men, just as reported. Konstantin Volkov, recognizable from Maxim's photos, standing by a grimy window with a gun in his hand. 3 others at a table counting money. A 5th man closer to the door, reaching for a weapon at his belt. And in the corner, zip-tied to a chair, was a small girl with dark hair and tear-streaked cheeks, wearing a torn dress and clutching a purple backpack to her chest like a shield. Lily Chen. The room exploded into chaos. The 5th man's hand closed on his gun. Alessandro shot him twice in the chest before the weapon cleared its holster. The man dropped without a sound. Dante came through the door behind Alessandro, his gun tracking to the 3 men at the table. "Don't move," he barked in Russian. 2 of them froze, hands slowly rising. The 3rd, younger, stupider, went for his gun anyway. Dante's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall, but Volkov was already moving. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Lily, yanking her chair backward and pressing his gun to her head. The little girl screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut through Alessandro like a knife. "Back!" Volkov shouted, his accent thick, his eyes wild. "Back or I kill her. I kill her right now." Alessandro's gun was already aimed at Volkov's head, but the angle was wrong. The Russian was using Lily as a shield, his body mostly hidden behind her small form. One wrong shot and the girl died. "Don't be stupid, Volkov," Alessandro said, his voice deadly calm despite the rage burning in his chest. "You kill her, you die. There's no escape. The building is surrounded. Then we all die together." Volkov's hand shook, the gun trembling against Lily's temple. "You don't know who I owe money to. Better to die here than face them empty-handed." Lily's eyes found Alessandro's, and in them he saw the same desperate hope he'd seen in Marcus's eyes. She was 9 years old, and she wanted to live, wanted to see her brother again, wanted this nightmare to end. Alessandro had one chance, one shot. If he missed, if the angle was wrong, if Volkov twitched at the wrong moment, Lily died, and Marcus's world ended. But if he didn't take the shot, Volkov would pull the trigger anyway. Desperate men with nothing to lose always did. Time seemed to slow. Alessandro's training, his experience, 3 decades of violence, it all came down to this moment. To this one shot that would either save a little girl or haunt him for whatever days he had left. He thought of Isabella, of how he'd been too late to save her. He thought of the promise he'd made to himself in the years since, that if he ever got another chance, he wouldn't fail. This was that chance. Alessandro's finger tightened on the trigger, and in that moment, everything changed. The world crystallized into a single moment of perfect clarity. Alessandro could see everything. The sweat beading on Volkov's forehead, the tremor in his gun hand, the exact angle of his head as he pressed the weapon against Lily's temple. He could see Lily's eyes wide with terror but also with a desperate trust in this stranger who'd come to save her. 3 decades of violence had taught Alessandro to read situations in milliseconds, to calculate angles and probabilities with inhuman speed. He could see that Volkov's trigger finger was tensed, ready to fire. He could see that the man's hand was shaking. Not much, but enough to make him unpredictable. He could see that Volkov meant every word. He would kill Lily, rather than surrender. Alessandro had exactly 1.2 inches of Volkov's head visible above Lily's shoulder. 1.2 inches of target at 20 feet, with a hostage's life depending on perfection. Impossible for most men. But Alessandro Rizzo was not most men. He exhaled slowly, letting his breath steady him, letting his heart rate drop, letting 30 years of training take over. His world narrowed to that 1.2 inches, to the space between life and death. "Last chance, Volkov," Alessandro said, his voice ice-cold. "Let her go." "Go to hell!" Volkov screamed, and Alessandro saw his trigger finger start to squeeze. Alessandro fired. The shot was perfection itself. The bullet caught Volkov exactly where Alessandro had aimed, through the exposed section of his temple. Above and behind Lily's head, the Russian's eyes went wide with shock, then empty. His gun hand went slack, the weapon tumbling away as he collapsed backward, dead before he hit the floor. Lily screamed, covered in blood spatter, but miraculously unharmed. The chair toppled forward, and Dante was there instantly, catching her before she hit the ground, cutting her zip ties with a knife that appeared from nowhere. The two remaining men at the table threw their hands up, surrendering before Alessandro could even turn his weapon toward them. They'd just watched their boss die in less than a heartbeat. They wanted no part of whatever came next. "Secure them," Alessandro ordered, and Giulio and Fabrizio moved in, zip-tying the men with brutal efficiency. The one Dante had shot was moaning on the floor, clutching his shoulder. Fabrizio kicked his gun away and tied him up anyway. Alessandro lowered his weapon and walked over to where Dante was kneeling beside Lily. The little girl was shaking violently, her purple backpack still clutched in her arms, her eyes squeezed shut as if she could make the nightmare disappear through sheer will. "Lily," Alessandro said gently, holstering his gun and kneeling down to her level. "Lily, my name is Alessandro. Your brother Marcus sent me to find you." Her eyes snapped open at Marcus's name, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Marcus? Is he okay?" One of them hit him and he fell, and I thought. She couldn't finish, her small body racked with sobs. "He's okay," Alessandro assured her, his voice softer than anyone in that room had ever heard it. "He's safe. He's waiting for you. He's been so brave, Lily. He ran all the way across the city to find help for you." Lily threw her arms around Alessandro's neck, burying her face in his shoulder. And something in Alessandro's chest, something that had been frozen solid for 25 years, cracked just a little bit more. He carefully wrapped his arms around her, mindful of his strength, and let her cry. "You're safe now," he told her. "I promise. No one's going to hurt you." Over her head, Alessandro caught Dante's eye. His second-in-command looked shaken not by the violence, which they'd both seen countless times, but by this moment of unexpected tenderness from a man who'd spent decades cultivating a reputation for having no heart at all. Alessandro's earpiece crackled. "Boss, we found them. 3 more girls, ages 10 to 14, locked in the basement. All alive, all terrified, but alive. We've got medical on the way." Relief flooded through Alessandro. 4 girls total, all safe. This could have been so much worse. "Good work, Piero. Get them out of here. Take them to St. Catherine's Hospital, the private wing. I'll call ahead and arrange everything. Make sure Dr. Amara Okafor handles them personally. She's dealt with trauma cases before. And Piero? Make sure every one of those girls has a police officer they trust assigned to their case. No one sweeps this under the rug." "What about these scumbags?" Giulio asked, gesturing to the tied-up men. Alessandro looked at them with cold contempt. These men had been about to sell children into slavery. They'd terrorized innocent kids, destroyed families, inflicted trauma that would last lifetimes. In his younger days, Alessandro would have made them disappear, would have made sure they suffered before the end. It was what they deserved. It was what the old Alessandro Rizzo would have done without hesitation. But he could feel Lily's small arms around his neck, could feel her trust in him. And he thought about Marcus, waiting in the car, believing that Alessandro was one of the good guys despite all evidence to the contrary. "Call Detective Nora Fitzgerald at Boston PD," Alessandro said. "Tell her we have 4 men involved in a trafficking operation, caught in the act. Tell her there are 4 child victims who need justice. Tell her if she wants to make the case that defines her career. This is it." Dante raised an eyebrow. Alessandro never involved the cops. Never. But he just nodded and pulled out his phone. "What about him?" Fabrizio asked, nodding toward Volkov's corpse. "Self-defense," Alessandro said flatly. "He was holding a child hostage with a gun to her head. Witnesses will confirm." He looked at the surviving men, his voice dropping to something deadly. "Won't they?" The men nodded frantically. They knew Alessandro Rizzo's reputation. If they said anything different, they'd never make it to trial. Alessandro gently disentangled himself from Lily's embrace. "Lily, I need you to be brave for just a little bit longer. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Good girl. Dante here is going to carry you downstairs. And then we're going to take you to see Marcus. Would you like that?" "Yes." The word burst from her with desperate hope. "Please, I want to see Marcus." Dante scooped her up gently, and she clutched her backpack like it was the most precious thing in the world. As they headed for the door, Lily looked back at Alessandro with eyes that held something approaching worship. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me." Alessandro felt something twist in his chest again. "You're welcome, sweetheart." As they left the room, Alessandro took one last look at Volkov's body. He felt no remorse. Men like that didn't deserve remorse. But he did feel something else, a sense that tonight had changed him in ways he didn't fully understand yet. For 25 years, he'd lived with the crushing guilt of failing to save Isabella. That guilt had shaped every choice he'd made, had turned him into the hard, ruthless man he'd become. It had convinced him that caring about anything made you weak, that the only way to survive was to never let anyone matter. But tonight, for the first time in a quarter century, he'd saved someone. Not for profit, not for power, not for reputation. He'd saved Lily Chen because a desperate boy had looked at him and seen hope. And Alessandro hadn't been able to turn away. Maybe caring didn't make you weak. Maybe it made you human. Alessandro pulled out his phone and made a call. It was answered immediately. "Father Callahan, it's Alessandro. I need your help. There are 4 girls who've been through something terrible tonight. They're going to need counseling, support, someone they can trust. Can Street Catherines handle that?" "Of course," the priest replied without hesitation. Father Callahan had known Alessandro since he was a teenager, had watched him transform from an angry kid into a crime lord. He'd never judged, never turned away. "I'll arrange everything." "Alessandro, this is a good thing you're doing." "It's the least I can do," Alessandro said quietly. "It's 25 years too late, but it's something." Father Callahan was silent for a moment, understanding immediately what Alessandro meant. "Isabella would be proud of you tonight," he said softly. Alessandro ended the call, not trusting himself to respond. He took a deep breath, holstered his weapon, and headed downstairs. It was time to reunite a brother and sister, and witness something he'd been denied all those years ago, a happy ending. Outside, sirens were beginning to wail in the distance. Detective Morrison was on her way, along with medical personnel for the rescued girls. By tomorrow morning, this would be all over the news. The anonymous tip that led to breaking up a trafficking ring, the heroic rescue of 4 children, the death of the ringleader in a confrontation with armed rescuers. Alessandro's name wouldn't appear anywhere in the official reports. It never did. That was the deal he'd worked out with the few honest cops in Boston. He gave them wins. They gave him anonymity. But Marcus and Lily would know. They would remember. And somehow, that mattered more than any amount of publicity. Alessandro stepped out into the cold Boston night and saw the black Mercedes SUV parked in the alley. Even from a distance, he could see Marcus pressing his face against the window, desperately searching for his sister. Dante emerged from the building behind Alessandro, still carrying Lily. The moment Marcus saw her through the windshield, he threw the car door open and ran. "Lily!" His voice cracked on her name, breaking into something between a laugh and a sob. "Lily!" Dante set the little girl down, and she ran to her brother, her purple backpack bouncing against her back. They collided in the middle of the alley, Marcus dropping to his knees and catching her in an embrace so tight it looked like he'd never let go. "I'm sorry," Marcus was sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I should have protected you. I should have." "You did protect me," Lily said fiercely, her small hands cupping her brother's face. "You got help. You saved me. Marcus. You and Mr. Alessandro." They clung to each other, 2 kids who'd seen too much darkness but had somehow found their way back to the light. Alessandro watched from a distance, giving them privacy for their reunion. Dante came to stand beside him. "You know what's going to happen now, right? Word's going to spread. Damaged kid approaches Alessandro Rizzo in a restaurant, and the city's most feared crime boss drops everything to save his sister. People are going to start showing up asking for help." Alessandro knew Dante was right. He'd just set a precedent. He'd shown weakness, or what people in their world would see as weakness, compassion, humanity. But watching Marcus and Lily hold each other in that cold alley, Alessandro couldn't bring himself to care. "Let them come," he said quietly. "Let them all come." The emergency room at Street Catherine's hospital was controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced efficiency between the 4 rescued girls, checking vital signs, documenting injuries, providing comfort where medicine couldn't reach. Father Callahan had arrived within minutes of Alessandro's call, his presence bringing a sense of calm to the frightened children. Alessandro stood in the hallway outside, watching through the glass partition as medical staff worked. Beside him, Marcus refused to leave Lily's side, holding her hand while a doctor examined her. The little girl kept looking at her brother as if afraid he might disappear if she looked away for even a second. Detective Nora Fitzgerald approached, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and competent, one of the few cops in Boston who couldn't be bought and actually gave a damn about justice. She and Alessandro had an understanding. He occasionally provided her with cases that made headlines. She occasionally looked the other way when his methods weren't exactly by the book. 4 girls, she said without preamble, standing beside him to look through the glass, ages 9 to 14, all taken within the last week. The task force has been looking for them, but we had no leads, nothing. And then I get a call that you've not only found them all, but also handed me 3 suspects gift-wrapped with enough evidence to put them away for life. The 4th suspect didn't survive, Alessandro said flatly. So I heard. Hostage situation, gun to a child's head. Witness statements all say you had no choice. She turned to look at him. They also say it was one hell of a shot. Alessandro didn't respond. They both knew that the official story that an anonymous concerned citizen had intervened was fiction. They both knew that Alessandro Rizzo had walked into that building with armed men and come out with 4 rescued children and 3 traffickers in custody. But they also both knew that some fictions were necessary. The families are being notified, Morrison continued. 3 of the girls will be reunited with their parents tonight. The Chen kids. She consulted her notes. Their mother works a night shift at 2 different jobs. We've contacted her. She's on her way. Alessandro nodded. He'd already arranged for Dante to meet Mrs. Chen, to have a car waiting to bring her to the hospital. The woman was about to discover that her worst nightmare had nearly come true. The least he could do was make sure she got here safely. Alessandro, Morrison said quietly. Why? He knew what she was asking. Why had he done this? Why had he risked his reputation, his carefully maintained image of cold pragmatism, for children he didn't know? 25 years ago, someone took my sister, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I searched for 3 days. When I found her, it was too late. He paused, looking at Lily through the glass. Tonight, I got to be in time. That's all the reason I need. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. She'd heard rumors about Alessandro's past, about the tragedy that had shaped him, but he'd never confirmed them before. I'm sorry, she said finally, about your sister. So am I. Alessandro pushed away from the wall. I need to go. You have my contact information if you need anything else for your case. Wait. Morrison reached out, almost touching his arm before thinking better of it. What you did tonight. Those girls are alive because of you. Their families get to have them back because of you. That matters, Alessandro. Whatever else you are, whatever else you do, tonight, you were a hero. The word felt strange, foreign. Heroes were in movies and comic books, not in the real world where Alessandro lived. Heroes didn't run criminal empires. Heroes didn't have blood on their hands from decades of violence. But looking through that glass at Marcus and Lily, at the way they held onto each other like lifelines, Alessandro thought maybe Morrison had a point. Maybe tonight, just for tonight, he'd been something other than the monster everyone thought he was. Make sure they're taken care of, Alessandro said. All 4 families. Whatever they need, counseling, security, financial help if they're struggling. Make sure they get it. Alessandro, the department has resources. Not enough resources. Never enough. He pulled out a card and handed it to her. This is my accountant. He'll set up a fund. Anonymous donor. The families won't know it came from me. Morrison took the card, studying him with new eyes. You're full of surprises, Rizzo. Don't get used to it, he replied. But there was no heat in the words. As if on cue, the elevator doors opened, and a small Asian woman rushed out, her face streaked with tears, still wearing her uniform from one of her jobs. Dante was with her, guiding her gently toward the examination rooms. Mrs. Chen saw her children through the glass and let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. She rushed into the room, and Marcus and Lily immediately threw themselves into her arms. All 3 of them collapsed into a pile of tears and relief, holding each other so tightly it looked like they'd merged into a single person. Alessandro watched the reunion and felt something in his chest, that crack that had started when Marcus first grabbed his arm in the restaurant. It widened a little more, letting in light he'd tried to keep out for decades. He turned to leave, but Marcus had spotted him through the glass. The boy pulled away from his mother and sister and ran out into the hallway. Before Alessandro could react, Marcus threw his arms around him, hugging him with all the strength his injured body could muster. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice muffled against Alessandro's suit jacket. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You saved her. You saved my sister." Alessandro stood frozen for a moment, unused to such open affection, such pure gratitude. Then, slowly, he put his arms around the boy and let him cry. "You saved her?" Alessandro corrected quietly. "I just helped. You're the one who was brave enough to ask for help, who ran across the city, who refused to give up. You're the hero here, Marcus." Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, Lily holding her hand. The woman looked at Alessandro with eyes that held so many emotions it was impossible to separate them all. Gratitude, relief, awe, and something that might have been fear. She clearly knew who he was, knew his reputation, but she also knew what he'd done for her children. "Mr. Rizzo," she said, her voice accented but clear. "I don't have words to thank you. My babies are alive because of you." Alessandro gently disentangled himself from Marcus and faced the woman. "I'm just glad they're safe, Mrs. Chen. Your children are very brave. You should be proud." Lily let go of her mother's hand and walked up to Alessandro. She looked up at him with those big, trusting eyes and held out her purple backpack. "You kept this safe for me," Alessandro said, confused. "Open it," Lily said shyly. Alessandro unzipped the backpack. Inside, along with the digital watch Marcus had mentioned, was a child's drawing. He pulled it out carefully and studied it. It was a picture drawn in crayon, a small girl holding hands with a tall man. Above them, Lily had written in her childish handwriting, "My hero." "I drew it while we were waiting for the doctor," Lily explained. "It's you. You're my hero." Alessandro looked at that crude drawing and felt something break inside him, not in a bad way, but like ice breaking in spring, making way for new growth. For 25 years, he'd defined himself by what he'd failed to do, by the sister he hadn't saved. But maybe, just maybe, he could also be defined by what he had done tonight. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'll treasure this." He carefully folded the drawing and put it in his jacket pocket, right over his heart. Dante appeared at his elbow. "Boss, we should go. Media's starting to arrive. Questions will be asked." Alessandro nodded. He looked at Marcus and Lily one more time. "You take care of each other. And if you ever need anything at all, you call this number." He handed Mrs. Chen a card with a phone number on it. Nothing else. Just the number. Day or night, someone will always answer. "We will," Marcus promised. "And Mr. Alessandro, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. Someone who helps people when they're in trouble." Alessandro studied the boy for a long moment, thinking about all the things he could say. He could warn Marcus away from his world, tell him to be better than Alessandro could ever be. He could point out that helping people tonight didn't erase 3 decades of questionable choices, but instead he simply said, "Then be someone better. Be someone who helps people without needing my kind of power. Be someone who makes the right choices from the start." "I'll try," Marcus said seriously. "That's all any of us can do." Alessandro turned and walked away, Dante falling into step beside him. Behind them, the Chen family reunited, whole again, despite everything that had tried to tear them apart. As they stepped into the elevator, Dante said quietly, "You know this changes things, right? Word's going to spread. People are going to think you've gone soft." Alessandro touched the pocket where Lily's drawing rested against his chest. "Let them think what they want. Some things are worth being soft for." The elevator doors closed, and Alessandro Rizzo descended back into his world, a world of shadows and power, and carefully maintained fear. But he descended as a slightly different man than the one who'd gone up. The crack in his armor had let in light, and he wasn't sure he wanted to seal it back up. Maybe, just maybe, there was room in his life for both the darkness he'd embraced and the light he'd forgotten. 3 days after Lily's rescue, Alessandro's phone started ringing with calls he wasn't expecting. The first came at 6 in the morning from Piero, who sounded both amused and concerned. "Boss, we've got a situation at La Stella Nera. There's a line of people outside, like 50 people. They've been there since the restaurant opened at 5 a.m. for prep. They all want to talk to you." Alessandro sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What kind of people? Armed? Threats? No, boss. They're regular people. Families. There's a woman with her kid who says her ex-husband kidnapped their daughter and the courts won't help. There's an old man whose granddaughter is in an abusive relationship, and he doesn't know how to get her out. There's a teenager whose little brother got recruited into a gang. They all heard about what you did for the Chen kid. Alessandro closed his eyes. Dante had predicted this. Word had spread not through official channels, but through the whisper network that existed in every city. People talked, stories got told, and now everyone with a problem thought Alessandro Rizzo was their solution. Tell them to go home, Alessandro said. I tried. They won't leave. Boss, some of these people have been waiting in the cold for hours. One lady is crying. She keeps saying you're her last hope. Alessandro thought about Isabella, about how his mother had gone to everyone for help when she disappeared. The police, who'd written her off as a runaway. The social workers who'd been too overworked to care. The community leaders who'd offered prayers but no action. He thought about how desperate his mother had been, how she'd spent the rest of her short life wondering if there'd been someone, anyone, who could have saved her daughter. I'll be there in an hour, he said. When Alessandro arrived at La Stella Nera, the scene was exactly as Piero had described. A line of people stretched down the block, bundled against the November cold, their faces etched with the particular desperation that comes from running out of options. They watched his car pull up with a mixture of hope and fear. Dante was waiting at the entrance. This is a bad idea, boss. You help one person, word spreads. You help two. You become the unofficial problem solver for the entire city. You know what that means? It means you're no longer the guy people fear. You're the guy people come to when they need help. That's a very different kind of power. I know, Alessandro said quietly. Do you? Because once you open this door, you can't close it. These people will keep coming, more and more of them. And every time you help someone, you create enemies. The ex-husband who loses custody, the gang that loses a recruit, the abuser who loses control. You'll be making enemies out of regular people, not just other criminals. Alessandro looked at the line of desperate faces. He saw mothers holding children's hands. He saw elderly people who'd probably never broken a law in their lives. He saw teenagers trying to be brave while their worlds fell apart. And he made a decision that would change the course of his life. Let them in, one at a time. I'll hear what they have to say. Dante stared at him. You're serious. I'm serious. We'll need a system. Someone to screen the cases, figure out which ones are legitimate, which ones we can actually help with. Get Park in here, he's good at organizing things. And Dante? No one pays. This isn't a business. This is something else. For the next 8 hours, Alessandro sat in the private dining room of his restaurant and listened to stories that would haunt him. The woman whose daughter had been taken by her ex-husband to another state, where restraining orders didn't reach. The old man whose granddaughter was being beaten by her boyfriend but was too afraid to leave. The teenage girl whose little brother had been threatened into joining a gang that would probably get him killed before he turned 18. Alessandro listened to all of them. He asked questions. He took notes. And for some of them, the ones where he could actually help, where his resources and connections could make a difference, he made promises. By the time the last person left, it was dark outside. Alessandro's head throbbed, and his heart felt like it had been run through a meat grinder. The weight of all that suffering, all that desperation, sat on his shoulders like lead. Dante came in with coffee and sat down across from him. 18 cases, he said, consulting his tablet. You agreed to help with 12 of them. Do you have any idea what kind of resources that's going to take? The man-hours? The risk? I know, Alessandro said, accepting the coffee gratefully. And you're sure about this? About changing everything? Alessandro thought about it. For 30 years, he'd built an empire on fear and respect. He'd made millions. He'd commanded loyalty through a combination of generosity to his people and ruthlessness to his enemies. He'd created a legacy that would be remembered in Boston's underworld for generations. But what was that legacy worth? When he died, what would people remember? The crime lord who controlled half the city? The man who'd ordered countless acts of violence? The king of an empire built on other people's suffering? Or maybe, just maybe, he could be remembered for something else. Something that mattered. I'm sure, Alessandro said. But we do this smart. We're not vigilantes. We work within the law when we can. When we can't. He paused. When we can't, we're very, very careful. I'm not interested in creating more bodies. I'm interested in solving problems. Dante nodded slowly. You know this is going to piss off the other families, right? The Italians won't care as long as you don't mess with their business. But the Russians, the Irish, the Chinese gangs, they're all going to see this as you going soft. Some of them will test you. Let them test, Alessandro said coldly. I haven't forgotten how to handle threats. I'm just expanding my operations to include something besides fear. Over the next month, Alessandro proved he could do both. When Vittorio Maletti, the head of the Italian mob's Boston branch, sent men to test whether Alessandro was really going soft, they ended up in the hospital with broken bones and a message. Alessandro might be helping people now, but he was still Alessandro Rizzo. Touch his people, mess with his operations, and you'd learn why everyone had been afraid of him in the first place. But he also kept his promises to the people who'd come to him for help. The woman got her daughter back through a combination of legal pressure and a very persuasive visit from Dante and two large men to the ex-husband's workplace. The elderly man's granddaughter was extracted from her abusive relationship and set up with protection and counseling. The teenage boy was pulled out of gang recruitment through a program Alessandro funded anonymously. Word spread. More people came. Alessandro had to set up an actual system, an office, staff to screen cases, investigators to verify stories. It became almost like a business, except no money changed hands. Alessandro funded everything himself, viewing it as an investment in something he couldn't quite name yet. 6 weeks after Lily's rescue, Alessandro sat in his office late at night, reviewing case files. His phone rang. Unknown number. Yes, Mr. Alessandro? A familiar voice, young and uncertain. It's Marcus. Marcus Chen. Alessandro sat up straighter. Marcus. Is everything okay? Is Lily? Lily's fine, Marcus said quickly. Great, actually. She's in therapy and doing really well. Mom got a better job, she says. Someone called the manager and recommended her, and the manager offered her a position with better pay and only one shift so she can be home with us more. Alessandro smiled. He'd made that call himself, though Marcus clearly didn't know that. That's good to hear, Alessandro said. I'm calling because, well, I heard about what you're doing, about helping people, and I wanted to say, thank you, not just for saving Lily, but for being who you are. You could have just rescued her and gone back to your life, but you didn't. You're actually trying to make things better. Alessandro was quiet for a moment. Out of all the thanks he'd received, all the gratitude from the people he'd helped, something about hearing it from Marcus hit differently. I'm just doing what I can, Alessandro said finally. Well, it matters. It matters a lot. When I grow up, I still want to be like you. Maybe I'll be a cop, or a lawyer, or something that lets me help people the way you do. But the right way, you know? The way you said, making good choices from the start. I think you'll do great things, Marcus, Alessandro said, and meant it. Take care of your sister, and your mother. I will. Goodbye, Mr. Alessandro. Goodbye, Marcus. After he hung up, Alessandro pulled out Lily's drawing from his desk drawer. He'd had it framed and kept it where he could see it. A child's crude drawing of a hero. Maybe he wasn't a hero. Maybe he never would be. But for the first time in 25 years, Alessandro Rizzo was trying to be something other than the monster he'd become. And that, he thought, was a start. The test came 3 months after Alessandro started his unofficial help operation. It came in the form of Maxim Sokolov walking into La Stella Nera without an appointment, which meant something serious was happening. Alessandro was in the middle of a consultation, a mother whose son had witnessed a murder and was being threatened into silence when Piero appeared in the doorway with an apologetic expression. Boss, Maxim's here. Says it's urgent. Alessandro excused himself and found Maxim in his office, pacing like a caged animal. The Russian looked worried, which was concerning because Maxim never looked worried. We have problem, Maxim said without preamble. Big problem. You remember Konstantin Volkov, the piece of trash you killed for trafficking children? Alessandro's jaw tightened. I remember. His brother, Alexei Volkov, is in Boston. Flew in from Moscow yesterday. He is not small-time like Konstantin. He is Bratva, serious organization. And Rizzo. He blames you for brother's death. Konstantin held a gun to a 9-year-old's head, Alessandro said coldly. I don't apologize for what I did. I do not ask you to apologize. I tell you to be careful. Alexei brings 20 men. Well-trained, well-armed. He makes threats. Says you killed brother without permission, without respect. Says he will make example of you. Alessandro sat down at his desk. This was exactly what Dante had warned him about. By helping people, by getting involved in things that had nothing to do with business, he'd created enemies who had no respect for the old rules. Alexei Volkov didn't care about territory or profits. He cared about blood vengeance. "What does he want?" Alessandro asked. "At first, just you dead. Simple revenge. But then he hears about your new hobby, about how you help people now. And he laughs. Says if you want to be hero so bad, then you can be martyr too. He says he will burn your city down around you. Everyone you help, he hurts. Every case you take, he makes worse." Maxim paused, his expression grave. "And Rizzo?" He starts already. "The old man, the one whose granddaughter you saved from abusive boyfriend? His building burns last night, the building where granddaughter now lives. Safe. She escapes. But 2 neighbors do not. They die in fire." Message is clear. Alessandro felt ice flood through his veins. 2 innocent people, dead because he'd helped someone. This was the nightmare scenario Dante had predicted. He'd already contacted Detective Morrison about the fire. She was working with arson investigators to tie it to Alexei, but gathering evidence took time that more potential victims didn't have. "Where is he?" Alessandro asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Operating from old warehouse in Southie." "But Rizzo, you cannot just go in with guns. He expects this. He is ready for war. And if you fight him, everyone you help becomes target. He has list already all the people who came to you for help. All the families. He says if you don't stop your operations, if you don't give him your territory and disappear, he kills them all, starting with Chen family." Alessandro's hands clenched into fists. Marcus and Lily. This monster was threatening Marcus and Lily because Alessandro had dared to save them in the first place. "What do you suggest?" Alessandro asked Maxim. "I suggest you remember who you are," Maxim said seriously. "You are Alessandro Rizzo. Before you start playing hero, you are king of this city. You are man other men fear. Maybe it's time to remind everyone why." Alessandro sat in silence for a long moment, thinking. Maxim was right about one thing. He'd become so focused on helping people that he'd forgotten he was still a target. Still vulnerable. And now innocent people were dying because of his choices. He could stop. Could shut down his help operation, go back to being just a crime boss. Let Alexei Volkov fade back to Moscow, satisfied with his revenge. It would be the smart move. The safe move. But then he thought about Lily's drawing, still in his desk drawer. He thought about Marcus's voice on the phone, talking about wanting to help people when he grew up. He thought about all the families who'd come to him desperate, who'd found hope when everywhere else had turned them away. If he stopped now, what did that say? That the only people who deserved help were the ones who didn't make powerful enemies? That caring about others was a luxury you could only afford when it was convenient? No. Alessandro had spent 25 years living with the guilt of failing his sister. He wasn't going to spend the rest of his life living with the guilt of failing everyone else. "Tell Alexei I want to meet," Alessandro said. "Neutral location. Just him and me. No weapons. No backup." Maxim looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "He will kill you. Maybe. But he wants to humiliate me first. He wants to make me beg. That means he'll take the meeting. And what you do when you meet. I'm going to give him a choice. And then I'm going to remind him why people were afraid of me in the first place." After Maxim left to arrange the meeting, Dante came in. He'd clearly been listening from outside. "This is insane," Dante said flatly. "You're walking into a trap." "Probably," Alessandro agreed. "But I can't let him keep killing innocent people. And I can't shut down what we're doing here just because someone threatens us. If I do that, everything we've built, everything we've helped people with, it all means nothing. Then let's go to war properly. We have the manpower. We have the weapons. We can hit his warehouse tonight and end this. And in the crossfire, how many innocent people die?" He's set up in a residential area. He wants me to come in guns blazing because he knows I'll end up killing the very people I'm trying to protect. Alessandro shook his head. "No, this has to be smart. It has to be clean. So what's the plan?" Alessandro pulled out his phone and started making calls. The plan was risky, maybe suicidal. But it was the only way he could see to end this without turning Boston into a war zone. 2 hours later, Alessandro stood in an abandoned parking garage in Cambridge, exactly at midnight. He was alone, as promised. No weapons, as promised. Just him and his words and his reputation. Alexei Volkov arrived exactly on time, flanked by 4 large men who looked like they could crush cars with their bare hands. Alexei himself was a sharp contrast to his dead brother, where Constantine had been a thug. Alexei was refined, wearing an expensive suit, and moving with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight. Alessandro Rizzo, Alexei said, his English perfect despite his accent. The great hero of Boston. You look smaller than I imagined. And you look smarter than your brother, Alessandro replied. Which makes me wonder why you're making the same mistakes he did. Alexei's smile faded. My brother was trash. I do not deny this. He dishonored our family with his trafficking, his greed, but he was still blood. And you killed him. He put a gun to a child's head. I did what needed to be done. And now you play hero. You help people. You make yourself soft. Alexei circled Alessandro like a shark. This is weakness. In our world, weakness is death. Is it? Alessandro asked. Or is threatening children because you can't touch me the real weakness? Alexei's hand moved toward his jacket, but Alessandro didn't flinch. You want to kill me? Go ahead, Alessandro said calmly. But before you do, know this. I have information on every operation you run in Moscow. Every dirty cop you've bought. Every politician in your pocket. Every body you've buried. It's in a file with my lawyer, along with instructions to release everything to Interpol and the Russian Federal Police if anything happens to me or anyone I've helped. Alexei's eyes narrowed. You bluff. Do I? Your accountant in Moscow is named Yuri Sokolov. He's been skimming money from your operations for 3 years. About 800,000 euros so far. He hides it in an account in the Cayman Islands under his wife's maiden name, Petrova. The account number is... Enough! Alexei's hand was definitely on his gun now. How do you know this? Because I'm still Alessandro Rizzo. Just because I help people now doesn't mean I've forgotten how to gather intelligence. It doesn't mean I've lost my edge. It just means I've found something worth fighting for beyond money and power. Alessandro took a step closer, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous, the voice of the man he'd been for 30 years. Here's what's going to happen, Alexei. You're going to go back to Moscow. You're going to forget about your brother and forget about Boston. And if you ever threaten anyone I've helped again, if you ever come back to my city, I will burn your empire to the ground. Not with guns, not with violence, with information, with evidence, with every dirty secret you've tried to hide. Alessandro paused, letting that sink in. Or, he continued, you can pull that gun and shoot me right now. And before my body hits the ground, everything I know about you goes public. Your rivals will tear you apart. The authorities will have enough to put you away for life. Your empire crumbles. Your name becomes a cautionary tale. The parking garage was silent except for the sound of distant traffic. Alexei's hand remained on his gun, but Alessandro could see the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't a man who made decisions based on emotion. This was a businessman, and Alessandro had just explained the cost-benefit analysis in terms even a sociopath could understand. Finally, Alexei smiled a cold, respectful smile. You know what, Rizzo? I underestimated you. You are not soft. You just fight smarter than before. He removed his hand from his jacket. We have understanding. I go back to Moscow. You stay in Boston. We forget about dead brother who brought shame to family anyway. And the families I've helped? Alessandro pressed. Untouched. You have my word. Alexei extended his hand. In our world this is binding, yes? Alessandro took his hand and shook it firmly. In our world, breaking your word means death. Remember that. Alexei and his men left, and Alessandro stood alone in the parking garage, his heart pounding. He'd just bluffed his way through a conversation with a Bratva operative who could have killed him without consequence. The information about Yuri was real. Alessandro always did his homework, but the files with the lawyer were fiction. If Alexei had called his bluff, if he'd pulled that trigger, but he hadn't. Because Alessandro Rizzo, even when playing hero, was still dangerous enough that you didn't call his bluffs. Dante emerged from the shadows where he'd been hiding with a sniper rifle trained on Alexei the entire time. That was the dumbest, bravest thing I've ever seen, Dante said. Welcome to my new normal, Alessandro replied. 6 months after the confrontation with Alexei Volkov, Alessandro's life had transformed in ways he never imagined. The help operation had grown from a handful of cases to something that required a full staff. Investigators, counselors, legal advisors, even a few cops who'd gotten tired of bureaucracy and wanted to actually help people. Alessandro had officially separated his criminal operations from his help work, creating a clear firewall between the two. He was still a crime boss. He wasn't naive enough to think he could walk away from that completely. But now he ran his criminal enterprise with a strict code. No drugs in schools, No violence against civilians, no prostitution, no trafficking of any kind. Those who broke the rules answered to Alessandro personally, and the penalties were severe. It was late April when Father Callahan called and asked Alessandro to come to St. Catherine's Church. The old priest had been unusually cryptic on the phone, which meant something significant was happening. Alessandro arrived at the church to find Father Callahan waiting in the sanctuary, along with about 30 people he recognized, families he'd helped over the past months. Marcus and Lily were there with their mother, the elderly man whose granddaughter he'd saved, the teenager whose brother he'd pulled out of gang recruitment. All of them. "What's going on?" Alessandro asked. Marcus stepped forward, holding a large wooden plaque. "We wanted to thank you. All of us. You saved our families when no one else would help. You risked everything for people you didn't even know." He handed Alessandro the plaque. Engraved on it were the words, "To Alessandro Rizzo, Guardian Angel of Boston. With gratitude from the families whose lives you saved." Below that were signatures, all 30 families, their names inscribed in elegant script. Alessandro stared at the plaque, his throat tight. Guardian Angel. Him. The man who'd spent 3 decades building an empire on violence and fear. "I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "Then don't say anything," Mrs. Chen said softly, coming forward. "Just know that you made a difference. You made a real difference in the world." Lily ran up and hugged Alessandro around the waist. "You're still my hero," she whispered. Alessandro knelt down and hugged her back, this little girl who'd somehow become the catalyst for everything that had changed in his life. After the ceremony, after all the thanks and the tears and the promises to stay in touch, Alessandro found himself alone in the sanctuary with Father Callahan. "You've changed, Alessandro," the priest said. "In all the years I've known you, I've never seen you like this." "I'm still the same man," Alessandro protested. "Are you?" The Alessandro Rizzo I knew 6 months ago would never have risked everything for strangers. He'd built walls around his heart so high nothing could get in. But that boy and his sister, they broke through somehow. They reminded you that you're human. Alessandro sat down in one of the pews, still holding the plaque. "I failed, Isabella. For 25 years, I've lived with that guilt. Every day I wake up knowing I wasn't good enough, fast enough, strong enough to save her. And I thought if I became powerful enough, if I became feared enough, it would somehow make up for that failure. But it didn't," Father Callahan said gently. "No, it just made me more isolated, more alone, more convinced that the only way to survive was to never care about anything or anyone." Alessandro looked up at the priest. "And then Marcus ran into that restaurant, terrified and desperate, and I saw myself in him. I saw the boy I used to be before Isabella's death broke me, and I couldn't walk away. So you saved his sister. And in saving her, you started saving yourself." Alessandro nodded slowly. "I can't change the past. I can't bring Isabella back. But maybe I can honor her memory by making sure other families don't go through what mine did. Maybe that's enough." "It's more than enough," Father Callahan said. "It's redemption, Alessandro. Real redemption." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass windows, painting the sanctuary in rainbow light. "Can I ask you something?" Alessandro said finally. "Of course. Do you think Isabella would forgive me for taking so long to become the person I should have been all along?" Father Callahan smiled. "I think Isabella would be proud of who you've become. Not the crime boss, not the feared man with the reputation, but the man who saves children, the man who gives desperate families hope. That's the brother she would remember. That's the brother she would love." Alessandro felt tears prick his eyes, the first tears he'd shed for Isabella in decades. He'd kept them locked up for so long, convinced that crying was weakness. But maybe tears weren't weakness. Maybe they were proof that you were still human, still capable of feeling, still capable of love. "Thank you, Father," Alessandro said quietly. As he left the church, Alessandro's phone rang. It was Detective Morrison. "Alessandro, we've got a situation. A family in Dorchester is being terrorized by their landlord, threats, intimidation, trying to force them out so he can sell the building. They've got 3 kids, one of them disabled, nowhere else to go. You interested?" Alessandro looked back at the church, at the light streaming through its windows, at the place where 30 families had just thanked him for being their guardian angel. "Send me the address," he said. "I'll take care of it." Because that's what he did now. He took care of people, not for power, not for money, not for reputation, but because somewhere along the way, A desperate 11-year-old boy had looked at him and seen hope. And Alessandro had decided to become the kind of person who deserved that hope. He got in his car and drove toward Dorchester, toward another family in need, toward another chance to make a difference. The criminal empire still existed. He was still Alessandro Rizzo, still dangerous when he needed to be, but now he was also something else. He was a hero. And for the first time in 25 years, he was at peace. 10 years later, Alessandro Rizzo sat in his office at what was now officially called the Guardian Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided crisis intervention, legal aid, and protection services to families in need. The criminal empire he'd once run had been systematically dismantled over the years, replaced with legitimate businesses and charitable operations. He was no longer feared. He was respected. No longer a crime lord. He was a philanthropist. At 58 years old, his hair had more gray than black, and the scar on his face had faded with time. But his eyes still held that sharp intelligence, that ability to read people and situations with uncanny accuracy. He just turned that ability toward helping rather than hurting. There was a knock on his door. "Come in," Alessandro called. The door opened to reveal a young man in his early 20s, wearing a police academy uniform. Alessandro's face broke into a genuine smile, something that happened a lot more often these days. "Marcus," Alessandro said, standing to shake his hand. "Look at you, a real officer now." Marcus Chen had grown into a handsome young man, tall and confident, with kind eyes that still held traces of the terrified boy who'd burst into La Stella Nera a decade ago. He grinned and accepted Alessandro's handshake, which turned into a brief hug. "Graduated top of my class at the academy," Marcus said proudly. "I start my assignment next week. And guess what? They're putting me in the unit that works with the Guardian Foundation. I'll actually be one of the officers coordinating between the police and your organization." Alessandro felt a swell of pride. "That's perfect. You'll be great at it. You understand better than most cops what people go through when they need help." "Because I lived it," Marcus agreed. "That night, when Lily was taken, it shaped everything I became. I wanted to be someone who could help people the way you helped us, someone who could make a difference." "You already are making a difference," Alessandro said, "just by being the kind of man who cares. That's more important than any badge." They sat down, and Marcus pulled out his phone to show Alessandro pictures. Lily, now 19, was in college studying social work. Their mother had finally retired after years of working too hard. They were all thriving, all safe, all together. "Lily wanted me to give you this," Marcus said, handing Alessandro an envelope. Alessandro opened it to find a letter written in Lily's neat handwriting. "Dear Alessandro, I know I've thanked you a million times over the years, but I wanted to write you one more time as I start my career in social work. You saved my life that night. But more than that, you showed me what it means to care about people, to fight for them, to never give up even when things seem hopeless. I've decided to specialize in helping children who've been trafficked or abused. Because of you, I survived. Now I want to help other kids survive too. I want to be someone's Alessandro Rizzo, the person who shows up when no one else will. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being my hero. Thank you for teaching me that one person really can make a difference. With love and gratitude, Lily." Alessandro folded the letter carefully, his throat tight with emotion. This was his legacy, not the criminal empire he'd built, not the fear and respect his name had once commanded, but the lives he'd changed, the people he'd saved, the ripples of good spreading out from one desperate decision 10 years ago. "She's going to be amazing," Alessandro said. "You both are." "We learned from the best," Marcus replied. "You know, there's actually a training module at the police academy now, about community outreach and crisis intervention. They use your foundation as a case study how to actually help people instead of just processing them through the system. You've changed how an entire generation of cops thinks about their job." Alessandro shook his head in wonder. If someone had told him 10 years ago that police academies would be teaching his methods, he would have laughed. But here he was, a reformed crime lord whose approach to helping people was considered a model for law enforcement. "It's not about me," Alessandro said. "It's about what we can do when we actually care about people, when we treat them like they matter, when we refuse to accept that some people are just lost causes." After Marcus left, Alessandro sat alone in his office, looking at the photos on his wall. Not photos of criminal associates or business deals, but pictures of families, hundreds of them. Families the Guardian Foundation had helped over the years. Children who'd been saved, parents who'd found hope, lives that had been changed. And there, in a frame of honor on his desk, was Lily's original drawing from 10 years ago. A crude crayon picture of a little girl holding hands with a tall man. "My hero," it said. Alessandro picked it up and studied it, as he'd done countless times over the years. This drawing had saved him as much as he'd saved Lily that night. It had reminded him that he was more than the monster he'd become, that redemption was possible even for someone like him. His phone buzzed. A text from Dante, who now ran the day-to-day operations of the foundation. New case just came in. Single father, 2 kids, being extorted by loan sharks. "Wanna take it?" Alessandro smiled and typed back. "Send me the details. I'll handle it, because that's what he did now. That's who he was. Not Alessandro Rizzo, the crime lord. Not Alessandro Rizzo, the monster, but Alessandro Rizzo, the guardian angel, the helper, the man who showed up when no one else would." He thought about Isabella, as he often did, but now, instead of the crushing guilt that had defined decades of his life, he felt something else. Peace. He couldn't save his sister, but he'd saved hundreds of others. He'd prevented hundreds of families from experiencing the nightmare his family had lived through. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was better than enough. Maybe that was exactly what Isabella would have wanted him to do, with the pain of losing her, transform it into something that helped others. Alessandro stood, put on his jacket, and prepared to go help another family in need. He was 58 years old. He'd lived 30 years as a criminal, and 10 years as a hero. If he was lucky, he had another 20 years ahead of him. 20 more years to make amends. 20 more years to save lives. 20 more years to prove that redemption was real, that people could change, that it was never too late to become who you should have been all along. As he walked out of his office, past the wall of photos, past the grateful faces of people he'd helped, Alessandro thought about that night 10 years ago, about a desperate boy bursting through restaurant doors, blood on his hands and terror in his eyes. About a little girl with a purple backpack who'd called him her hero. That night had changed everything. That night, Alessandro Rizzo had been given a chance at redemption he didn't deserve, but desperately needed. And he'd taken it. Now, every day was another chance to live up to the faith Marcus and Lily had placed in him. Every family saved was another step away from the man he'd been, and toward the man he was becoming. Alessandro stepped out into the Boston sunlight, ready to help another family, ready to be someone's hero, ready to continue building a legacy that would outlive him, a legacy not of fear and violence, but of hope and second chances. The guardian angel of Boston. That's what they called him now. And for the first time in his life, Alessandro Rizzo was proud of his name, because he'd learned the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to care. It's never too late to be someone's hero. All it takes is one moment, one choice, one desperate child who looks at you and sees hope, and the courage to be worthy of that hope. If you've made it to the end and haven't subscribed yet, this is the perfect time to become part of this family. Also, do tell me in the comments what struck you most about the story. What was the greatest lesson it left you? I try to read all the comments, and I love knowing how these stories move you. Finally, I just want to say, thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed it, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and even more intriguing than you can ever imagine. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.